everybody, and welcome to another Meet the Author. We've got a great guest today. Gary, who do we have?
Well, tomorrow we have today Gavin Coyle. Welcome, Gavin. Gavin is going to talk about his book, Workplace Safety on a Budget, How to Stop and Prevent Accidents and Injuries Without Sacrificing the Bottom Line. Prior to the start of this session, we did have in the waiting room a conversation about, isn't it curious, isn't it interesting that safety maybe doesn't have its own language, that we often succumb to the body of knowledge of other professions. This is an example today. We're having to use the language of the finance world. So we're going to talk about bottom line and budget. And I'm sure that some of you are saying, yeah, sometimes I use, when we talk about regulation, the language of the legal profession. So that's something to think about, but let's not dwell on that too long. So Gavin, why did you decide to write this book?
Guys, thanks very much for having me. Very excited to be with you today, and really looking forward to having a chat about the book and everything health and safety. And yeah, the reason I wrote the book was predominantly my business would have been involved in utilities and energy, sort of premium level, high scale, large dynamic jobs that had major budgets. And I was constantly being made aware from smaller contractors, if you like, in the construction sector, that they struggled with health and safety because of the complexity of it and because it cost too much, and how they struggled to sort of meet the demands of trying to comply with safety and trying to win these jobs to get into these bigger jobs, because they said that there was barriers to these jobs. And one of them was safety, because they couldn't afford to, you know, spend the money on the top safety guys, or to put in these so-called fancy systems that they called. And that was a sort of something that was a theme for me for maybe 10 years, that I've always looked at the small to medium enterprises, and, you know, I couldn't really get my head around the fact that they couldn't see that safety can be achieved by any company, regardless of your size, if you do it in a smart way. Now, I would caveat that to say that I do not have any financial background or have no accountancy background, but I've ran a couple of businesses, and I have operated, obviously, the Colye Group as a business, which is an international business. So I understand the value of the dollar. And what I've started to see as trends within the industry of safety over the last 10, 15 years is a sort of a safety washing of safety within companies, where, you know, we talk about greenwashing in the environmental sector, but like this whole area of throwing money into safety to make it look and feel that, you know, we have this lovely safety environment and we have this lovely safety culture and everybody's safe, and that's why you should use us as a company. And that's fantastic for branding, and I get that. But I wanted to see, where's the output on that? Has that stopped accidents from happening? And so I suppose I was being a bit cheeky when I used the title Workplace Safety on a Budget, because I wanted people to come away from the normal narrative of, well, you can't put safety and profit in the same sentence. And so, you know, this is sort of like a trigger cover, if you like, to alert people or make people aware that maybe we should look at a different movement in terms of how we look at safety, and that safety is for everybody, not just for an elite few.
Yeah, right. So when I hear the word budget, I immediately think of a line item appearing on some income and expense financial spreadsheet. Is it just about spending money, Gavin, or do you have a wider perspective that maybe includes other resources?
Yeah, like when we looked into this, we became very aware that health and safety has a touch point in every part of a business, regardless of what that business is, whether it's retail or construction, engineering, manufacturing. It doesn't matter. In every department, from HR, procurement, purchasing, operations, it's just some level of health and safety in there. And what we were able to see and to analyze was there is a spend. It might be not direct, it may be indirect in some of these departments, but there is a spend that has an influence on safety. And so then the conversation then began more into, well, what's the output on that spend? So for example, if we take for an example, the HR department or the recruitment division, and how they bring in people into the company. They don't have to be health and safety people. We can generalize it and call it any person. And you ask yourself, you know, what's the safety elements of the hiring and onboarding process of that person? So you look at the whole interview process and how does safety influence that direction, and was safety discussed within that whole scenario of doing the interviews? And then you move forward into the onboarding process. And then obviously we've seen, and everybody would be aware, listening to this conversation, that safety becomes more and more bigger in terms of the spend and the dollar value, because you're onboarding and you're getting into training and awareness, and then you're bringing in supervisors and management teams to help support the onboarding of that person, which has an indirect and direct spend on safety. And then maybe the person might work out or not work out after a lot of training, formal and informal, and supervision and information, instruction and training and PPE and all the other stuff that comes with it. Now all of a sudden safety is starting to create a bigger and bigger spend. And then we looked at it and said, well, look, if you went and you got the best people and you put a model together to say, look, if we spent the extra 20,000 on a salary, would we have got a better person and a better product, in inverted commas, for what we're looking for within the business? And so now people's mindsets start to change in terms of, hold on a minute, yeah, the loss of 5 or 6 people could have attributed just to, you know, getting that one superstar in that particular department. And that's a whole nother discussion, another evaluation. But it again, it leads back to what we would call the business of safety, which is something that has come out very strong out of the book, was, you know, what is the business of safety? And the business of safety is how people operate their business, but how they look at it from a safety. And what we're trying to get people to think about is safety as not just a compliance center, but a profit center. So safety can actually be linked to profit. And how do we do that?
Right. So if we're going to talk to about small, medium-sized businesses, or SMBs for short,
yeah,
should we be looking at maybe having a single expense line item in my annual budget? I know for all the years that I was a line supervisor and a corporate manager, I never had a line item called safety. Should we have one? Then therefore make it easier to maybe have a measure for bang for the buck?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. What we're trying to really get to, I suppose, if we pull away all the language, I suppose, since you opened up the talk about language, really what we're trying to say is, how do we get into the boardroom and have a discussion with the leaders of the business in such a way that they will invite health and safety people to become part of the bigger discussion of the scale and the success of the business? And what we were seeing in all different sizes of business, this isn't just small to medium size, that safety wasn't really having a voice at the boardroom level, at leadership level. Yes, people were being regarded and had reputations and they were trusted. But when it came to actually the scale of the business, the safety person wasn't part of that discussion. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? You know, why do we not have more than a 5-minute open intro on a board meeting, in terms of, you know, the first thing the chairman might ask is, you know, how many accidents and incidents have we had? You know, what is our LTIFR? And, you know, what's the spend on safety at the moment? Maybe if we're lucky, and that's it. And then we move on to the growth of the company, the scale of the company, opening up new opportunities, what clients are being difficult, and it goes into a whole different other field of conversations. And the safety person is not part of that discussion. The person that brought that discussion or that data to that boardroom table might luckily be a safety director if we're lucky, but you know, that person becomes defunct in the conversation. And so when you talk about, you know, small to medium enterprises, we're talking about having a line item for safety, but then expanding that, and what does that look like, and start creating a sort of like a tree approach in terms of branches of different areas within the business that we can sort of link into and have a discussion about the spend on safety and where we're actually spending ourselves into too much safety, in terms of we've spent too much on something that's not having an obvious result for us in terms of, you know, the bottom line, which is, you know, stopping accidents and, you know, creating scale within the business. And so we're finding that health and safety people have found it difficult to have that conversation in terms of directly linking the commercial responsibility, if you like, of scaling the company along with the compliance of safety as a sort of parallel approach. And I suppose if there's one thing that we'd like to get out of here today, is that people might come away and go thinking, you know, I might just try a pilot project maybe on an area of the business that we're spending money on safety, or safety has an influence in terms of the spend. And let's do just an evaluation on that and see exactly, are we getting our bang for our buck?
Yeah, right. Well, many initially believe that safety isn't a product or a service that's created, but it's something that emerges. Similar to success, happiness, or trust, we can't create these things. We just do some things and it just emerges. So how does one budget for something that Karl Weick calls a dynamic non-event?
Yeah, so like a lot of, if you look at sort of the business mantras of, you know, how to scale a business, you don't start from the foundation of how you scale a business. You start from the future of what you think the business might look like. And in most cases, that's an exit plan for most business entrepreneurs and stuff like that. They will think about how they want to sell the business at some stage. If it's for sale, they might never want to sell it, but they would have the sale of the business in mind, and then they would work their way back from that. So, you know, when you have that discussion in terms of the non-event, the non-safety event, it's very difficult to sort of put that together and go, well, if it's a non-event, how do I work myself back from a non-event to where I am today? So, you know, it is the conundrum in terms of, you know, we don't know, and we have never solved the issue of stopping accidents and just, you know, putting a nominal value on it is not where we're trying to go. We're not trying to say that if you have such and such a size of business, then your budget should be X. Your budget is what you think it is in order to be relative to where the business scale, opportunity, and then the competency within the business and the culture within the business and the processes and the systems and the maturity of the business. And so there's what we want the people to follow, is that the profit can actually fit into the spend of what the culture is within the business of where it wants to go to. And so if you want to be a successful business, you will obviously put money into the right areas in order to be successful. But what we're finding again is that some people have ran away with that and have got too far up north in terms of their spend on safety. And it's become, I would say in some cases, damaging that people have introduced programs that are, again, non-output related to stopping an accident, and that could be more repurposed into something that's more important, such like buying better equipment, employing better people that are at a higher salary. And we could all go on and on and on. I'm sure everybody that's listening to the discussion knows the frustration of, oh my God, why don't you just buy a better car or a better piece of equipment, or better, you know, bring in more intelligent people so that we can deliver a better product.
Yeah. Well, in your book, which is over 20 chapters, you really go into that, where you talk about these different conditions. So yeah, we may not be able to budget directly for safety, but you can certainly budget for the conditions that allow safety to emerge.
Yes.
So can you just briefly talk about these different expenses? You talk about direct expenses, indirect, goods, and services. Can you just give us that an overview of your book as well?
Yeah, like there's so many different areas we could look at. Like, for example, we use gig economy platforms, and we have done for the last 20 years. And if you if anybody, like we use Upwork, for example, when we're not saying Upwork is the go-to, but it will be one of the top 3, if not the top freelancer gig economy platform. And the amount of safety people that have moved into that space, the gig economy space, especially since COVID and the pandemic, you know, to earn an extra few pounds for themselves, maybe for their pension or whatever it is, or maybe they're retired and just want to keep their finger on the pulse. And if you correlate that with the fact that safety people are doing nearly up to 80% of their time spending it on administration duties, as opposed to actually in the field, having conversations, interacting with people, getting information back so that it's meaningful, so that they can, you know, build what they're trying to do in terms of the culture of the business. You know, we're getting completely and utterly tied up in knots in administration. And so, you know, we talk about in the book about how you could probably freelance out some of that work where you don't have to now pay for pension funds and employee welfare schemes and all the rest of it, but you have this sort of model of a freelancer type situation where you say, okay, there's somebody in the Philippines, or there's somebody in Russia, or there's somebody in whatever part of the world that can have that done for me. And by the time I come in tomorrow morning, all I need to do is take that documentation, put my own spin on it in terms of where I needed to make it specific to the particular task or operation. And then it allows me better time during the day to do better things, which is interact with people, collaborate with people, promote the vision of safety within the business, and, you know, be there in the physical sense with people, as opposed to being behind a laptop or a desktop. And so there's anecdotal sort of discussions in the book in many different forms that have that same sort of conceptual value system, if you like, in terms of trying to get people to think about, you know, how much value is on me, and am I actually doing tasks that are low ticket items that somebody else is better to do than me, and rather than me just delegating that to somebody who, you know, might be lower down the chain, they might not be as good at that than me. But, like, you know, we found massive talent over the years in terms of academics, you know, researchers, people within the petrochemical industries that had, you know, lots of information and analytical stuff to bring to the table that we would never be able to produce ourselves, and we would never be able to employ these people at the level that these people are at. Yes, there is the low ticket, you know, I'll do it for $2 and $5. If you want to go down that road, you'll actually probably spend more money on those people by the time you realize the mistakes that you've made. So, you know, you do your due diligence, you find your core team in terms of the outsourcing, but then you also have your core team within your team. And then now you're starting to create departments within departments. That is, like, you know, you're starting to create momentum.
So, you know, I just want to comment on the fact that I think you're talking, Gavin, from a big scale. So we're talking medium businesses. So I'm retired, but anyhow, I was in the oil and gas industry, but we had, I guess, 200 employees at one site. Well, I was the guy. I did everything. So, you know, I did the training, I did the paperwork, I did, you know, blah, 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 the whole thing. So when you're talking about, you're scaling up to bigger businesses, stuff like that too. So on the smaller side of it, you know, you don't really have the opportunity to get somebody else to break off into smaller groups and everything else. So, and I'm only talking from my example. I was lucky enough that I was in the monthly meetings and stuff like that too. We had to report budgets, we had to report on statistics and everything else. And the company I work for, they weren't going to sell it. So in that sense, we had I think 6 other facilities. But the owner was very hell-bent on safety, because we had 1 or 2 accidents at the other facilities in the States. And that drove him to, you know, make a mandate for safety and, you know, for all the precautions and budgets and everything else. So I think talking about this, it's kind of a fluid type of thing, because it depends on your situation and where you are and what type of business you're in, like you said. But there's lots of places. I mean, I worked for Goodyear here in Canada too. There was only still me. You don't have different guys underneath there. Like, we're making rubber for tires. Like, you don't have big groups of that all the time. So I'm not sure on the scale that you're talking about, right? So
I'd like to answer that, and it's very relevant to the current climate. There's a massive shortage of health and safety people globally in the market right now, and supply and demand is completely skewed, and it's not going to correct itself. And all the statistics are saying that it's going to get worse, if anything. So there's no fix to productivity is going through the roof, and health and safety people are not coming through in terms of being enough people being qualified to deliver the amount of productivity. So that's, having a team. When I speak about teams, I don't necessarily mean from a large scale. I mean that you can have models within your business that makes your business smarter. And when I talk about freelancing, I talk about, and I'm not just solely talking about freelancing, but I'm talking about creating situations where you can have functions within your business that other people are doing that are more focused and competent. And they might be even in a different time zone that can allow you to scale your business and be focused on what your core business is. And what we're seeing a lot is that companies are being pulled into different areas that is not their core expertise, because there's a lack of tradespeople, for example, in the market, and clients are driving contractors to do things that they wouldn't normally do because the client can't find, other people to do it. So let's take example, like somebody might be doing drywall, and the client is turning around and saying, well, look, will you do the painting as well? Get a painter, because, drywall and painting, it can't be that big a deal, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing where the small man is being pushed into doing other things within their business that they shouldn't really be doing. And, that's going to, there's a whole good discussion around where that's going to go in terms of, people losing focus on what they're good at. And we have a clear case study. I think Gary will bring it up later on, where we worked with one business and how they've changed their whole operation in order to how they're actually operating as a business, because they went down this pigeonhole of doing things to satisfy their clients rather than, turning around and saying, no, we don't do that. But if we do it, we're going to have to bring in somebody that's specialist. We'll have a discussion about that. But to cut to the chase in terms of your discussion, I had a discussion with a small contractor who simply couldn't pay for safety and didn't have the budget because of the price of what a health and safety professional would cost them in the current market. And so we modeled a discussion with that person in terms of, well, what's important? And so what we learned was important was he had no processes for health and safety. He had no systems in place for health and safety. So he didn't build a system or a process around the company. So then we start talking about a quality manager might be more important than a safety person for the business, because the quality person can bring in a system, ISO standard, for example, that's environmental quality and safety. And then we can bring in an administrator who can administer the system. And then we can bring an independent consultant in who can have the higher approach or the strategic approach on how the system operates. And it can evaluate the system from time to time. And then we can look at the system where we bring in a graduate health and safety person who's just come out and is kind of green. But how do we manage that person? And then we can take a guy off the shop floor who's heading for retirement, who's kind of heading out the door, and then that person can transfer the knowledge over to the graduate health and safety person. So when I talk about teams, I'm talking about collaborations. And so I'm not just talking about a safety department as a team. I'm talking about integrating health and safety in a wider approach, that everybody has some element of involvement as a watchdog or as a manager of health and safety. And that goes from the leadership right down to the shop floor.
Well, I'm glad you brought that part up about the ISO. So we were successful at where I was, that we had 9,000, 14,000, and 22,000. So,
very good. Well done.
And what I found is those systems, because, you have to incorporate the training and everything with everybody else. So, when you get audited, they're looking for training requirements, and they're looking for all these different components. So,
yeah,
so like at a smaller scale, that helped build all that stuff in my example anyhow, and it helps the overall.
It gave you a framework.
Because you have to report, right? So,
yeah,
and this is one of the things after I retired. I was set out proposals to do this for small. And you're right, the gap is in the smaller companies than the medium companies, and I understand that wholeheartedly. So I retired just before COVID, and I set out proposals. COVID came, and then guess where that went? So nothing happened, right? So I'm kind of in the same. Whether I'm trying to gear up again to maybe do this again, you're going to help small businesses and things like that too, right? So
Yeah,
I mean, there is a, to me, because I had about 14 years experience with ISO. I think for small and medium-sized companies, you can use that framework to build all that behind. You don't need to necessarily have, all that,
yeah,
the other,
all
the
internal.
other fluff and everything else. But you can get one or two people, like, so I mean, so I would be the lead and everything else, but you would get your supervisor on that to be involved too, because that's the scale of the resources you had. So, you make them part of the system too, right? And part of the whole group. So,
Yeah,
there's different ways of going at it instead of just money and everything else, I guess. But I mean, I think there's a big opening for that somewhere along the line here. So
there it is. And so we set up a website called Gavin-Coyle.com. It's in test mode at the moment, but what we realized was that people were downloading a lot of safety information off the internet and just putting their logos on it and saying, well, this is mine now, it's a safety policy, it's my policy and stuff like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to give that in a structured environment and put it into a more professional, constructive environment for small to medium business owners in the construction sector, so that we're going to give it to them for free and say, look, if you're going to download it off the internet, we're going to give it to you for free, and we're going to put it into a more professional, structured approach. And we want to bring you forward in the conversations for the future so that you could become more matured in terms of your approach to health and safety. So rather than this sort of black market stuff going on in the background for robbing, documentation off the internet, we want to embrace the small to medium construction owners to say, look, we'll give it to you for free because you're taking it anyway, and let's put you into a model we can just massage you into our community over a period of time, and then maybe someday you'll turn around and go, these guys are all right. I think I kind of trust them, and I kind of trust the way things are going here. So from the book become a website, we have a business of safety academy where we have a 14-day program to try and help people to think more smartly about how they spend their money on safety. And there's loads of other discussions and avenues we could go into, but I want to be very clear that it is very much was based on the fact that the small person, the woman or the man, working mad hours in the van, getting home from work, sitting at the dinner table and doing the P&L or doing the invoices or whatever. That's the person that we originally targeted with all this. But you can take it right to the top in terms of multinationals. Everybody can get a lesson out of this.
Yeah.
So sorry, what was the website? Sorry, I didn't get all that.
It's Gavin-Coyle.com. I can put it in the show notes at the end with Tamara and Gary.
Yeah. We'll add it on the posting, Peter, so you can have a look at that.
Thank you.
But I think just comments. Yeah.
We also have a question from LinkedIn.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Just letting somebody in. Adnan asks how safety could be embedded into core business processes. Why safety professionals always require some space to speak about merely is all about safety in silos, plus too much subjective. Can kindly shed some light. So I'm just going to put that in the chat also, so you can read it for yourself.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole discussion about why is safety on its own. We've made it on our own because we have embraced the theory and the methodology of, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail. And that discussion, we have to get past that discussion, because that was the original sort of mantra that we were all brought up with in health and safety. Don't do this because you're going to go to jail. And then all of a sudden we've isolated that ourselves because that became a very powerful conversation back in the day to try and get that sort of wake-up call with business owners, but business owners are desensitized to that discussion today. They're, you know, they don't do things for the, in general, you know, business owners do not want to see people die, and they don't want to do things recklessly, and they want to be seen to be doing the right thing. So yeah, so we have moved on, and we need to move on, but that person is absolutely right. How do we put safety into the box of the momentum of the business? And the momentum of the business is the scale of the business. And without getting to the boardroom discussion, we're not going to scale safety at the same level as the business, or any business from where we're sitting. And that's our sort of opinion, rightly or wrongly, but that's the road that we believe needs to be opened up, because we believe that safety has a ceiling in its current structure, that safety people are not getting past that sort of boardroom level discussion to have meaningful dialogue with a CEO or a board and say, hey, hold on a minute, I think we can reduce our cost of safety by about 50% or up to 50%. I've read this book, or I've come up with some of my own ideas, and you know, if I can prove to you that we can reduce our cost on safety and make some money for the business, number one, I want you to reinvent that or repurpose that money into some areas that I know that we need to put into the business from a safety perspective that's going to make more smarter sense for the business. Yeah, you can take some of your profit off that as well, but I want you to repurpose it in such a way that we get more value for ourselves. And what does that look like, and how do we achieve that?
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of leaves me asking the same question as I did before. How do we get into those conversations?
That's chapter 16. And
Oh,
that's
we're
really
not-
talking about lean principles and operations, because I understand where you're coming from, Peter. Let's put in all the ISO systems and standards in there because they're available. But I also recall Carsten Busch saying, like, do you really, really want to do that? Because are you going to introduce a lot of bloat as well, which nobody understands? So to me, like, if you want to put all that stuff in, then look at lean principles and operations. And Gavin, in your chapter 16, can you tell us how you relate that to workplace safety and lean?
Yeah, like we've had one of the leading lean gurus, if you like, Professor Keegan from Ireland, actually, who advises Toyota on lean principles. So he reviewed the book. Was one of the first persons I approached with the book. I'm not a lean expert, or again, put my hands up, I'm not a lean expert. I don't have lean training background, but I wanted his take and his view in terms of where I was going with this. And he was like completely fascinated with the whole concept of how do we put a lean approach within the health and safety industry. And he thought it was really refreshing that we were going to have a look, that safety people were going to have a look at introducing lean into the safety model. And so one of the case studies, I think it's probably best that we bring up that case study, Gary, is that we used a case study in Ireland where we went in to do a gap analysis. So tomorrow we would approach the situation with a sort of a softly, let's do a gap analysis on the business and see where things are in the business. And so part of the gap analysis would have been interviews, no more than any other gap analysis, informal and formal interviews, but majority of the interviews were confidential interviews and stuff like that. And what we found very quickly was this is 100 workers. We didn't interview every one of them, but we get a selection of top down, bottom up. And we found that the company was using overhead power line workers in trenches. And so this was just blew our mind as regards, like, these guys were employed where they were trained overhead lines workers, overhead power line workers, but they were working in trenches. And we were just like, how did we get here? You know, and the workers were saying, well, this is the way it happened. They won a government contract, and they came to us and said, we're going to pay you more money to do this particular task. You're going to get a longer time with the business, which means you have a longer career progression with us, and stay where you are, do this work, and everybody's going to make money and we're all going to be happy. And so the guys climbed down off the overhead power lines and started working in trenches. Now, the work that they were doing was less competent than the work that they were originally paid for, but they were getting paid more money to do it because they'd won this contract. So this was really fascinating to us, that the company, why was it that didn't, do anything else other than use their existing workers? And when we spoke to the board and to the owners, they didn't want to bring anybody else into the business that maybe become a threat to them in the sense that they would introduce them to their current client base, and then they would lose that relationship because, this company that they brought in became sort of more familiar with their client base, and therefore they gave them an avenue to get into their structure and their business and their market, if you like.
Mhm.
And this was completely just, opening all doors for us in terms of red flags and, the bias that was in the company that they had created within their own culture of not letting anybody else in, yet they were doing something that wasn't their core expertise. And this is what we discussed earlier on in this conversation. They had now created a situation where they were doing a lot of work in these trenches that wasn't their core expertise and wasn't the reason and this company is now a 50 million turnover business today. So it took us 6 months to convince them to go out to market, to look at specialist contractors who only do that particular task.
Mhm.
And we said to them, look, we'll let down to 3, we'll help you and we'll guide you, and we'll actually introduce you to one particular company. Not that we wanted to push them, and we just said, here's an example of a particular company that only does that work. And so the thing about it was they had all the information about how to do that job. They knew exactly how many hours it took to do that particular task. They knew how much equipment they needed. They knew how much spend they needed. So we were able to work with them in terms of the whole tender package about how much that was actually that job was actually worth. And then when they went to tender, they were able to see how much margin they could make by bringing in this specific company. And they brought in one of those companies, and that company became from a 20-person company to now applying over 80 people in their business because of the strength of winning that contract. And then the overhead power line guys got to come out of the trenches and got to be repurposed back into their original task. And then the company was able to go back to their client and say to the client, we now have capacity to do more work because we have these overhead power line guys. So the projects that you were holding off for the future, you can now bring them forward because we can now deliver those projects. So now we start talking about the business of safety, and we start saying to ourselves, well, here's a model for the business of safety. Safety became the reason why we were brought in the first place. And now we looked at safety from the business perspective. And we still speak to the owners of that business, and they would tell you north of $1 million they have made by making those changes because of that particular case study. And so, this was pre the book, but a lot of the stuff that's in the book sort of had touch points in the discussions that we were having with the case study.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, any questions or thoughts from anybody? Okay, right, okay. Well, let me throw something else out that's in your book, and that's talking a bit about accidents. And I don't have to say too much about how costly accidents can be, but what are your thoughts, Gavin, about budgeting for accidents? Should we have a budget for accidents? And who should hold that budget? Does that make sense?
I think if you look back in 10 years' time, you'll ask yourself, why are we not budgeting for accidents? Because again, if you go back to the earlier discussion about the business logic of selling your business and what does your business look like, and you look from the end and you work your way back the exit, if you like. So we have to look at the non-event event, if you like, and work our way back to the foundation levels, because you can't work your way forward to an accident. That's just you could be pulled and dragged into totally different areas. So let's pick an accident, for example, that's relevant to the business, and let's link that to the risk assessment or risk management of the business and say, it's a good chance we're going to have a fall from height, guys. What's that look like? In a catastrophic scenario, what does that look like? And let's piece together the crisis management, the reputational damage, the emotional damage, the workforce damage, the client base, and all the rest of it. And let's start collecting a model about what that looks like. And that's what we're really trying to say to people is, it's easy to pick the accident, Gary, because it gets people's attention, but it's only one model. It should be one of many models, and eventually, hopefully, you start running out of loads of models, and it gets down to kind of 2 or 3 models, and then it becomes the bigger model, which is the overall model, and that's what we would like to see in terms of companies. And like, there's no reason why it shouldn't be a small man, one man in the van, calculating, am I paying too much for insurance? Am I paying too much for safety? Am I paying too much for supervision? Am I paying too much for training? All that kind of stuff. And then, like, in his own or her own mind, they're modeling. They are creating models in their own head, and this should be no different. But if you can make it descriptive, then you have a goal. And if you have a goal, then you have an objective. And if you have an objective, then you have a metric that you can put a figure to.
Yeah, good one. You remind me when I read your book, we had a conversation about an experience I had about 30 years ago in a utility as well, where I worked, where we did have a fatality. And then the word came out that we spent $2 million on accident investigation, fines, and litigation. And one of the frontline workers says, well, why didn't we take that $2 million and invest that earlier? Right. And I think if I had your book, I would say in this book tells you how you would work that backwards and where we should invest in, so we don't have these $2 million sort of expenditures.
Yeah.
And it's always funny because they talk a bit about, again, frontline workers. We always seem to have money to spend on investigations, but we never have money to fix the broken plank. Why is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, that story just so much resonates with me. And I suppose that's why when I was writing the book, all the stuff that I've been talking to people in individual conversations, or maybe the odd meeting with 2 or 3 people, a lot of that stuff was digging up in my head, and in terms of, well, why are we not talking about this? Why is this not something that we look at as, in your language, as an emerging discussion for health and safety? Is that, we don't talk about the money side of things with health and safety enough, from my perspective. And we tend to leave it to the insurance guys and the legal guys, and that's something that, and health and safety people are kind of humble people. They kind of go, well, that's kind of above me. It's not really for me. It's kind of somebody else that has a longer profession or a bigger profession. Like, we're within our own right, and we had a discussion with Tamara earlier on about, we're a profession within our own right. But then, there's a whole discussion about who are we, and what is the title of who we are, and is that relevant anymore, and will it be relevant in the future? And do we have a proper defined health and safety title as individuals, and what does that look like going forward? I think we need to have a serious look about from the academic side of things right through to where we're at the moment. I think there's a whole body of work to be done in terms of how do we attract top level talent into the health and safety industry, and what do we call those people once they emerge into the new workforce.
Oh, right. Peter, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just, we're kind of, I see we're going back and forth here with a bunch of stuff, and I just keep going back to my own experience. So, we've had this discussion when I've been on before, and with other, we've had other people on too, to drive the health and safety or the environmental part that I did. You had to be not, you had to be forceful. You had to get in there and you had to make your point and everything else. And for us, I would say in Ontario and Canada, I think the rest of the province are the same. We have our own boards and all that stuff. So the WSIB and all that stuff. So Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. Well, your accidents and all that stuff, there's a rating and all that stuff. So I'm not sure, Gavin, what it's like in Europe, whatever they have. I'm sure there's something that's the same, I guess. But the costs are driven there by an accident. So, if you had to get trained on how they did the ratings and all that stuff. So, a guy could go to the hospital or get a nick and, he has to go out, right? So, well, If he's only gone for less than 2 days, then it doesn't cost you anything. Anything over 2 days, then, you know, the clock starts going, and then, you know, the rating starts, you know, building up, and that's where the money is, right? So, I mean, the reality is, as part of health and safety, and when you're reporting, I mean, that's a cost. That's the cost that you see. So if you're getting accidents, well, that would make you go backwards to see, okay, what's going on? So are we training properly? Do we have the, you know, do we have all the documentation is safe? Do we have the safety equipment? Have we done our risk assessments? Have we done our, you know, our analysis, our job analysis and all that stuff? So
yeah, but
again,
sorry to cut across you, but again, when I hear you talking like that, I start thinking to myself, are we the right company doing the right thing in the right place?
Well,
have we, like, that's not a conversation that happens in the accident, in the accident scenario. You know, you're talking about information, instruction and training and process and systems. I'm asking, should you be doing that in the first place, what you were doing? Have we got the capacity to do what we done? Maybe we should be doing that particular task because that's what our core expertise is. But have we evaluated the capacity of us as a business to deliver at the level that we should be delivering, at the performance we should be delivering?
Well, that's all that's all the stuff that happens before. That's when you do your analysis and your risk assessment. That's what I'm saying. So, but I mean, ultimately, the you know, when you're talking about the cost itself, the thing that you see is that WSIB statement. You know what I mean? But before, and I agree with you, like, everything's got to be done before that. So that's why these systems, Gary, and I don't mean everybody has to have a system. I'm just saying there should be some outline that you can provide to small and medium businesses that can do that, and give them that opportunity, give them that opportunity to set themselves up so they don't get, you know, in trouble. I guess let's just make it like that, right? So, but I mean, and I don't know, like, I'm hearing that these companies aren't doing that work, and, you know, my experience is we do that work first, and then we move ahead, you know, and hopefully there is no accidents, right? So, you know, like, I
think from a small person's point of view, they're completely disengaged with health and safety, because they felt that there's too much paperwork, there's too much bureaucracy, there's too much you know, unknowns or complexity with health and safety, and we've made it too complex. And because we've taken, in Gary and Tamara's an opening statement, the language of health and safety from lawyers and insurance companies, and we've ran with that information as professional safety people and said, oh, well, you need to be reasonably practicable. You need to have, you know, all these different statements that are legal jargon. And we've anecdotally put them into policies and statements that people that can't read and they can't understand. And we've made it just, you know, we've complexed the whole scenario for them, for the guys on the ground I'm talking about. And we just need to go back to basics in some areas and sort of start from scratch again and say, right, let's just go back and sort of make this as basic as we can. What exactly do you need in order to get up and run a business? You need X, Y, and Z. Here's the playbook for setting up a business. Here you go. It's yours. Now, when you become a bit more mature and you start developing your business and you become more successful and you start scaling up, come back to me and let's have a chat. And we'll go to the next part of the risk maturity process or curve, and we'll have a discussion about that. But what interests me very much and Yvette, I see Yvette is on the call here, was there's a landmark case in Ireland where the judge decided that he didn't fine the company enough, and he asked for their profit and loss sheet, the Kilsaran case, Yvette, and he went, I think, from 250,000 fine to $1 million fine, because he looked at the success of the business and he said, hey, you've done all this crap and it resulted in a fatality, and you could have done more. And look at the money and the spend that now we're starting to think profit is starting to connect with safety at a judicial level. And that's a landmark case that only happened in the last, I think, 5 years. That case came forward.
Well, in Ontario, they have fines for supervisory level, management level, and owner level. So I think now it's gone up to, Tamara, maybe it's gone up to $5 million or something like that now for for the corporation, the supervisor gets up 250 grand or something like that. They changed I know I should probably refresh myself with that, but that's just coming from the legislation. That doesn't mean there was another case where the company got fined, corporation or anything else, and then they went to court because there was fatalities, and there was more fine on top of that. So
Yeah.
We are hitting the top of the hour right now. So let me do this. Let me close this conversation here with something that is in the realm of how to, because we did a lot of why, we did a lot of what. Let's talk about how to, because we are practical people. We want to take some stuff away here. So in chapter 20, Gavin, you suggest safety initiatives can establish a caring culture. So let me set this up for you. Let's say that a diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI initiative has been launched to improve psychological safety. Well, this clearly is not a simple, slam dunk, easy to implement initiative, and who knows how long it's going to take before success emerges. So based on what you know and the fact that you talked about complexity, what are your budgeting thoughts? Because we do have to talk about business case and talk the language of finance people. What are your budgeting thoughts on controlling spending during times of uncertainty and unpredictability?
Yeah, like the likes of a diversity inclusion initiative, like the program you're talking about, you know, let's look at the risk profile of introducing such a innovative, dramatic, if you like, type program. Like, what's the risks of that program damaging the business? And I don't think we have enough discussion about that. You know, it sounds great. It has this lovely program and it has all of these bells and whistles, and it's being presented in fantastic marketing for us that we can kind of go, oh my God, some of our competitors are already doing this. We need to get on the bandwagon and do it ourselves. And so, you know, we're seeing a lot of leading by others culture going on, where because our competitors are doing it, we have to do it. And then when you start introducing some of these programs, you derail your actual culture, and people start saying, why are we actually doing this? Like, this is something we would never have done. And I know the owner of the business, and he would have never, or she would have never done this in the past. Like, why is all these programs coming in now? And what benefit are we getting out of? The next thing, you're distracting the workforce from the core focus of what you're trying to achieve. And, you know, I agree that there's certain elements that we need to look at that are, you know, environmental, and that they're, you know, have a sort of a higher purpose approach. But I don't get to the point where we go too far north that we can't come back from. And now all of a sudden we've got a disgruntled workforce that are kind of confused with the messaging of the culture within the business. So what we always, our mantra is always, get your core foundation principles in place first, and then let them become the default for your business. Should a pandemic occur, or should, you know, a derailment or some sort of catastrophic event, that you always have a default budget program, that this is the core structure of our business that we can default to in any adverse situation. And so you model that. And I know it's easy to say we model that, but once you've started to have these conversations about cost, output, metrics, strategy, roadmap, vision, you know, and it's clear amongst all the stakeholders, including the workers, what the actual core principles of the business is. Then we all know, okay, the S is after hitting the fan here. Let's default to foundation level stuff and keep the head down, and let's just go back to where what we're, you know, what the bones of the business is.
All right. We have reached the top of the hour. So like I usually do, I'd like to ask Gavin, what your 3 takeaways you would like to leave with the viewers?
Yeah, I think me and you had a discussion about this, but one of the big things for me would be, you know, the book was written, as I said earlier on, you know, more about trying to raise awareness to people to start thinking about, you know, health and safety as a profit center and a compliance center, and maybe think about that as a concept within your business, and have a pilot in mind that you might say to yourself, do you know what, I'm just going to take one small element, something that's not too big of a chunk of an exercise, and introduce a sort of a spreadsheet type of analytical approach to how much you're actually spending on safety in that area. And can you improve the spend, or can you you might come back and say, actually, we need to spend more money in that area because it's delivering bigger results for the business. And we're not talking about that to the leaders. So, you know, don't bite off too much initially, and maybe involve a CFO or an accountant. If you're a small business, that you might bring your accountant in and ask them or her to evaluate that particular area from a safety perspective, and then start creating it. And I tell you, you'll have great fun and excitement with that process, because it starts to become, you know, infectious in terms of, okay, what can we do next? And where can we go with this? And what can we do next? And moving on to the next subject, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I don't want to, there's other areas we could obviously, in terms of takeaways and stuff like that. The second biggest point for me is I'd love the people just to stick to their core focus on their core competency within what they do and how they deliver their business. And maybe have a look at in your business and say, are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing? Is there areas in your business that you've actually, you know, divulged or diverted to that wasn't the normal part of what you did as a business? And we're seeing that a lot because of the stress that's on the productivity market at the moment, that companies are being diverted into other areas that's not their core expertise. And that's a massive risk for businesses. And the third one that is my own sort of thing as well, is that there's a real big issue with a lack of safety people within the industry. And I think as safety professionals, we need to do a much stronger effort to try and attract new blood or new people. It doesn't matter what they look like at this point, because we haven't solved that point. But, you know, why is more people going into other careers and not going into safety? I don't think we're doing enough to promote the career of safety in the global industry, and especially considering the market and the global market and what that looks like in the future. If we can all make a concerted effort to try and, you know, win the hearts and minds of people, to try and introduce people that we see who have empathy, who have personality, who have the work ethic, and yeah, they have a bit of academic behind them. It's not fundamental, but they do have some element that will get them past the sort of the educational piece, if you like. And yeah, we can all help them with that if they need help.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks, Gavin, for joining us. Tamara, back to you.
Thank you. Well, this was a great conversation. And thank you for taking your time out of your busy day, Gavin, for joining us and sharing all your knowledge, and for sharing the insights into your great book. And thank you to all our audience for coming today and spending our time, because without you, we wouldn't have a show. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, see you next month.
See you next month.